The snow was falling sideways, thick like ash from a dying sky, when Joseph dropped to his knees beside the rusted fuselage. His breath came in short, broken clouds, one hand trembling against the cold steel, the other gripping a small brass plate he'd just unearthed beneath decades of grime. Built for the stars, grounded by love, CM 1947. The initials burned into his chest like a forgotten promise. Behind him, Violet's voice cracked the silence. "Dad, you might want to see this." She held up a sealed envelope she'd found wedged under the pilot's seat. Yellowed, unbroken, and marked, "For Helen Mansfield. If I don't return." Joseph's fingers shook as he took it. Somewhere in the dark, the distant hum of an approaching engine echoed through the hangar. That was the moment he realized this wasn't just about saving his shop anymore. This was a man's last message to the woman who never stopped waiting. And someone powerful, was finally coming to claim it. The sky over Hartwell cracked with the sound of landing gear kissing tarmac. A sleek white jet rolled across the frost-bitten runway like it didn't belong in a town this forgotten. Joseph stood still outside Hangar 5, his breath held as the hatch opened. She stepped out slowly, Helen Mansfield. At 78, her spine still straight, silver hair curled immaculately beneath a wool hat, eyes hidden behind dark lenses that couldn't mask the weight of memory. Behind her, Amanda Foster, her trusted aide, whispered something he couldn't hear. Helen nodded once, then turned toward the hangar. Joseph's boots felt cemented to the concrete. Beside him, Violet and Blake watched, their expressions unreadable. The air carried a strange kind of reverence, like the second before a church bell tolls. Then Helen stepped inside the hangar and stopped cold. Her hand rose slowly, trembling toward the silver frame of the aircraft that had waited 75 years. The hush was absolute. "Charles built that curve for wind deflection at high altitude," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone present. "He tested it using coat hangers and kitchen foil while our baby napped in the next room." Her fingers hovered just above the gleaming rivets. "God, it's real." Joseph exhaled only then, as though her recognition granted him permission to believe it too. He stepped forward, not too close. "Mrs. Mansfield, I don't know what this means to you exactly, but we've done our best to preserve—" "You found what even the Smithsonian couldn't," Helen interrupted softly. She turned to face him, removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were wet. "You didn't just preserve a plane. You found a love story that vanished without a goodbye." Behind them, Amanda was already scanning documents, cross-referencing photos, measuring the cockpit's dimensions, ensuring this wasn't some elaborate forgery. Blake, notebook in hand, stepped into frame like a junior historian. "We found a brass plate under the seat. It says—" "I know what it says," Helen cut in, her voice breaking. "I helped Charles etch it. He wouldn't let the factory do it. Said if anything happened, he wanted me to know I was the reason he built it." For a moment, everyone fell silent again. Then Helen turned toward Joseph, back straight like she was addressing a boardroom. "I'm offering $2 million, half for the full restoration, half to establish a permanent heritage center in Hartwell. But only if you keep it here. If this aircraft leaves this hangar, the soul goes with it." The wind outside howled like it was listening. Mayor Hayes, who had arrived without a sound, stepped from the shadows with 3 members of the town council. Her face was taut. "We just postponed the vote. You're saying you'll fund the restoration and preserve the airport?" Helen nodded. "Not just the airport, the story, the purpose, everything this town was built on." Anthony Harrington's footsteps rang sharp on concrete as he entered from the opposite end. "You're being manipulated," he spat. "By sentiment, by nostalgia. That aircraft is a ghost. My offer gives you cash, land, viability, not fantasies." But before the mayor could speak, David Harrington emerged behind his father, holding a folded blueprint. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "We're not preserving a ghost. We're resurrecting a future." Anthony turned on him. "What did you say?" David's voice grew firmer. "Your legacy is strip malls and parking lots. Mine will be something people travel to see. Something built on wonder, not just profit." It was the first time Joseph truly looked at David, not just as the developer's son, but as someone else entirely. A bridge between two worlds. Helen approached them all. "I didn't come here for a fight. I came to find what I lost. If you want to sell your town, do it. But I promise you, there are stories in this hangar that will outlive every supermarket you pave." Joseph didn't realize his hands were clenched, didn't notice Violet inching closer, Blake watching the mayor with the sharpness of someone twice his age. Everyone was waiting. Mayor Hayes turned to Joseph. "Can you deliver? Can you make this aircraft fly again if we give you the time?" Joseph's throat was dry. He looked at the plane, at Helen, at his children. "Yes," he said, "if we're not bought out before sunset." From the corner, Amanda Foster whispered into her phone. Then she looked up. "Helen's attorney is drafting the agreement. You'll have formal documents within 12 hours. David laid the blueprint on a workbench. And if the council needs projections, I've already modeled a 10-year economic impact based on heritage tourism." Even Anthony blinked at that, but the moment didn't rest. A flicker of lights across the hangar signaled a brownout. Just a second, but it drew everyone's attention. And that's when Violet whispered, almost to herself, "Wait, that panel wasn't loose yesterday." Joseph turned, the brass plate. It had been pried open. A second inscription lay behind it. Faded, carved by hand, words barely legible. "If this aircraft is found, tell my wife it was sabotage." Joseph stepped back, stunned, and the entire hangar suddenly felt colder. The hangar had never felt so silent, so heavy with the weight of a single sentence. "Tell my wife it was sabotage." Violet's voice had been no louder than a breath, but those words echoed across the steel bones of the aircraft like a secret awakened from sleep. Helen stepped forward first, faster than anyone expected a woman her age to move. She stared at the carved letters behind the brass plate, her fingers hovering inches above them, afraid to touch, as if confirming their presence would break something fragile that had just barely held together all these years. "No one knew," she whispered. "Everyone assumed the storm brought him down." Joseph watched her jaw tighten, her composure breaking in degrees, first in the quiver of her lip, then in the sudden wetness in her eyes. But when she turned to face him again, the grief had been folded back under that fortress of steel she'd learned to wear like armor. "Start from the beginning," she said. And so Joseph did. They went back to where this story truly began, not in the gleam of discovery, but in the quiet, gray exhaustion of a man trying to keep his family afloat. 3 months earlier, Joseph Clark had been scraping ice off the inside of his hangar windows, working nights to finish repairs on aging Cessnas, while his twins slept in the small office loft he'd converted into a second home. Violet's birthday had passed with a store-bought cupcake. Blake had stopped asking if they'd keep the house. Joseph told himself it was temporary. That one job, one contract, one break, and they'd be okay. That break came disguised as an old man in a brown coat. Richard Morrison, the airport manager, had stopped by after dusk, his boots dragging dust and snow into the shop. He leaned against the frame of the hangar, silent for a long time, watching Joseph strip an engine block with hands stained by years of flight and failure. Then he said it casually, like it was nothing. "I think I found something in Hangar 5. Joseph didn't look up. "If it's another Piper Cub held together with duct tape, I'll pass." Richard didn't laugh. "I'm serious, it's covered in tarps. Hasn't been touched since before you were born." It wasn't until 2 days later, when he needed to clear his head after a final notice from the bank, that Joseph took the keys and walked to the forgotten corner of the airport. The wind had howled through the sheet metal as he forced the rusted doors open. The smell hit first, dust, motor oil, and something else older, like time itself had been sealed in with the cold. And there it was. Not a wreck, not a relic, an aircraft. Custom-built, sleek, unlike anything he'd ever seen. The way the wings curved into the fuselage wasn't just engineering, it was poetry. There were no markings, no registration, only a small brass plate, CM 1947. He ran his fingers over it, and something sparked. That night, he couldn't sleep. He researched. He dug through FAA records, aviation forums, old newspaper archives, and slowly, like bones rising from the soil, the name began to take shape. Charles Mansfield, experimental aviation pioneer, disappeared in 1947 during a test flight. No wreckage ever found. Wife Helen Mansfield, pregnant at the time, widowed by mystery. Joseph's breath caught when he made the connection. That name wasn't just on history forums. It was also attached to a multi-billion-dollar aerospace company in Chicago. The following weeks moved fast, too fast. He brought the twins into the secret. Blake dove into every public record he could find. Violet began mapping the restoration plan, logging every part, every imperfection. They moved with purpose, because Joseph had felt it the moment he stepped into that hangar. The pull of something bigger than survival, bigger than them. But even in that momentum, shadows moved. Anthony Harrington appeared within days, too soon, too informed. He knew about the aircraft. He knew about Joseph's overdue mortgage, about the bank's plans, about the town council's desperation. "You have one asset left," he said, circling Joseph like a vulture around carrion. "That hangar, that aircraft. Sell now. Save yourself." Joseph refused, so Harrington started circling the council instead. Bribes disguised as offers, empty promises in glossy brochures, a strip mall, a car dealership, maybe a sports bar with neon signs. "You'll have jobs, revenue, progress," he told them. But it was rot. Fast money for a slow death of everything the town had once stood for. Then came the first scare. Someone broke into Hangar 5. Nothing stolen, nothing broken. But the tarps had been moved, the tools left rearranged, and the brass plate, it was loose. Joseph reinforced everything, told Blake to keep digital backups of every photo and document. Violet started locking the hangar from the inside when she worked late. But the pressure kept building. The bank gave them 30 days, then 20, then 10, until that morning, when Amanda Foster stepped off the jet and Helen Mansfield crossed a state line she hadn't visited in half a century. Joseph had wondered what she'd say, whether she'd demand the aircraft, whether she'd be cruel, dismissive, unreachable. Instead, she whispered, "It's real," like someone seeing a ghost that had finally come home. And then she saw the message behind the plate. "Tell my wife it was sabotage." As the words hung in the air, Helen's eyes locked with Joseph's. "You understand," she said quietly, "what this means?" Joseph didn't answer, because yes, he did. It meant someone tried to erase a legacy, and now, 75 years later, that secret had come home, waiting for the one man desperate enough to uncover it, and the one woman strong enough to finish what had begun with love and ended in silence. The town square in Hartwell had always felt like a forgotten echo of something greater, but that night it pulsed with whispers. Word had spread fast, about the woman, about the aircraft, about the $2 million she laid on the table like a chess move no one saw coming. And yet, beneath the awe, beneath the tremble of hope, another story began to bleed through the cracks, one nobody had asked for. In a booth at the Prairie Rose Diner, Joseph sat across from David Harrington. The coffee between them had gone cold, but neither had noticed. David's laptop glowed dimly with old blueprints, side-by-side comparisons of Mansfield's prototype and engineering notes recovered from the Smithsonian archives. But that wasn't what held Joseph's attention. It was the photograph David had found, grainy, scanned from a military contractor's personnel file. It showed Charles Mansfield standing beside a uniformed man in a flight jacket, the name stenciled over his chest, A. Harrington. "Your grandfather?" Joseph asked, his voice flat. David didn't answer immediately. "I think so, or maybe great-uncle. The records are patchy, but he worked at the same facility Mansfield disappeared from." Joseph stared at the man's face. The resemblance was undeniable, and something cold bloomed in his gut. "I don't think Charles ever disappeared," David said slowly. "I think someone made him vanish." That night, Joseph couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with the letter Amanda had handed him earlier. It had arrived at Helen's Chicago office a week before their visit. No return address, just a single sheet, handwritten in faded ink. "If anyone finds the CM aircraft, know that what happened in 1947 wasn't an accident. The storm didn't take it, people did." No name, no signature, but Helen had read it twice, then folded it silently and said, "We go to Hartwell." Now that letter lay beside a second envelope, one Joseph had found in a false compartment under the pilot's seat earlier that afternoon. It hadn't been there before, or maybe it had, buried beneath layers of dust and forgotten mechanisms. Inside, another message, older, shorter. "He knew too much. They wanted the engine, not the man. I told him not to fly. H." The next morning, Violet found her father asleep at the table, coffee untouched, circles under his eyes darker than she'd ever seen. She didn't wake him. Instead, she picked up the letter and read it. Once, then again. By noon, the council chamber was packed. Anthony Harrington stood at the front, all teeth and confidence, waving diagrams of projected revenue streams and digital renderings of a gleaming new shopping center that looked like it had been cloned from a dozen others. "This is real money, people, not fairy dust, not nostalgia. You want your kids to stay in Hartwell? Give them a town with jobs. Joseph waited until the silence between applause and rebuttal. Then he stepped forward, one hand gripping the brass plate. No, he said simply. What we give them is a town with memory, with meaning. Behind him, Amanda and Helen entered together, followed by David carrying a projector and Blake holding the aircraft's internal schematics. And then Joseph dropped the hammer, the second engraving, the hidden messages, the photograph. The man standing next to Charles Mansfield, identified by a military record as a man named Arthur Harrington, Anthony's father. Gasps rippled through the chamber like wind through dry leaves. Anthony's face didn't move at first, but his eyes, they froze. Joseph continued, "We don't know everything yet, but what we do know is this aircraft wasn't just lost. It was buried, its creator silenced, and someone made sure no one went looking." David stepped up beside his father. "I believe my family played a part in that, and I'm here to say we're not hiding it anymore." Anthony's mouth twitched. "You have no proof. This is all conjecture, rumor." "Then sue me," Helen Mansfield said. Her voice sliced through the room like a scalpel. "I'll match your legal team line for line. And while you spend years dragging your name through depositions, I'll build a monument to truth 50 feet from your proposed strip mall." Anthony turned to the council, desperation bleeding into fury. "This town will regret this." But it was too late. Something had shifted. The mayor stood. "The vote will be postponed. The council will consider the new evidence and the proposal from the Mansfield Foundation." Afterward, Anthony disappeared. But not before sending one final message, an eviction notice taped to Joseph's shop door, courtesy of a shell company he still controlled. Joseph stared at it for a long time, heart heavy but strangely calm. Because for the first time in months, he had a team behind him. That night, the hangar doors remained open, not from forgetfulness, but defiance. And inside, Violet stood alone beneath the suspended wing of the aircraft, her hands gloved, her eyes focused. She was rewiring the left control panel when she found it. A compartment, not mechanical, personal. She reached in slowly and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, initials burned into the spine. CM. She flipped it open, and the first page read, "For my daughter whom I may never meet. If someone finds this, tell her, I never stopped flying toward her." Violet's breath caught. Her voice barely broke the silence. "Dad, you need to see this." Joseph sat beside Violet under the wing of the aircraft, hands trembling as he held the notebook like it might vanish if he blinked too long. The pages smelled of old paper and engine grease, but each line felt alive, scrawled in the bold, meticulous hand of a man racing against silence. Charles Mansfield hadn't just designed a prototype. He documented everything: test data, sketches, diagrams, and woven between those were pieces of a man's soul, letters to Helen, notes to his unborn child, fragments of a legacy someone tried desperately to erase. Violet leaned her head on her father's shoulder. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. By morning, word of the journal had reached the council. Amanda called in aviation historians. Dr. Mitchell returned, this time with a camera crew from a national documentary series. And Helen Mansfield, she arrived alone. She stood before Joseph in the hangar, smaller than before, her strength no less visible but softened at the edges by something deeper than pride. "He wrote to her," she said quietly, staring at the book in his hands. Joseph nodded. "To both of you." Helen's lips quivered as she turned the pages. When she reached the one with the baby's name, "Emma, if you're ever told I abandoned you, don't believe it." Her knees nearly gave out. Joseph caught her without a word. For the next hour, she didn't speak, just read every page, every sketch, every love note from a man who flew for freedom and was silenced by fear. Later that day, during the town meeting that had drawn people from miles away, Helen stood before the crowd, the notebook in her hands, the aircraft behind her bathed in soft amber light. "This," she said, holding the book aloft, "is not just proof. It's purpose. It's the reason I'm donating the full sum. Not $2, but $5 million, to restore the aircraft, establish the Mansfield Institute for Aviation Innovation, and fund scholarships for children of this town." The crowd erupted. But Joseph saw something else. He saw Anthony Harrington, standing in the back, arms folded, alone, his empire crumbling, his son no longer by his side. David stood with the Clarks, sketching expansion plans on his tablet, already laying out the museum's future. Anthony's face was stone, but for the first time Joseph felt no hate, only understanding. Some men build legacies, others buy land and pave them over. As the hangar emptied into celebration, Helen lingered beside the aircraft. She reached for a panel near the cockpit and unscrewed it slowly. Inside was a small metal canister, tarnished, hidden. She handed it to Joseph with a trembling hand. Charles said he stored his final design here, the one the military never saw. Joseph opened it carefully. Inside were blueprints unlike anything he'd ever seen. An engine configuration that defied the era, a propulsion concept 20 years ahead of its time, and one final sketch, a version of the aircraft meant to carry 3. He understood. Charles never built this for war. He built it to come home. Days passed. Restoration began with urgency and reverence. Experts arrived from all over the country. Grants rolled in. The Mansfield Institute broke ground beside the old hangar, and Violet was offered a place as the first official apprentice of its restoration program. Blake was asked to document the journey, his blog and videos already reaching thousands, his name whispered in academic circles as a prodigy of aviation storytelling. Joseph, he became the heart of it all. Not the leader, not the owner, just the man who found the soul of a town hidden beneath a tarp, who chose to restore instead of surrender. On the day of the official unveiling, Joseph stood outside the completed museum, watching the sunset spill gold across the polished wing of Charles Mansfield's dream. Beside him stood Violet, Blake, and David. Helen sat nearby, hand in hand with her granddaughter Emma, now a woman in her 50s, brought from across the country to finally meet the family who resurrected her father's legacy. Emma approached Joseph slowly. "He wrote to me," she said softly, "in that book. I never knew who he was until now." Joseph swallowed hard. "He never stopped trying to get back to you," she smiled. "And now I know he made it, through all of you." Inside the exhibition hall, beneath a plaque that read, "Built for the Stars," grounded by love, stood the aircraft, fully restored, suspended in midair like it was ready to fly again. Visitors would come for years to stand beneath it, to hear the story, to touch the wing and feel the echo of a man who never gave up. As the last light faded over Hartwell, Joseph walked alone back to Hangar 5. It was quiet now, peaceful. He paused by the workbench where the wrench he used that first night still sat untouched. He reached for it, held it in his hand, then placed it gently into a display case marked, "The first tool that helped rewrite history." Sometimes history doesn't knock. It waits in silence beneath dust and time until someone, heart heavy, hands tired, decides to listen. And when they do, legends take flight.